Well, I thought maybe you'd like to see the process of machine quilting. So I've got the quilt that I'm working on right now. I've got my gloves with good grip on them, on my hands, and a whole bunch of quilts to work with. So I put it up and over my shoulder, but this is basically how I do it. Okay, here we go. So what I do is I draw my design, or trace my design that I've come up with that I'm going to quilt onto my quilt, onto tissue paper. I draw it on with Jiffy marker. And then once I have it all quilted, then I pull the design off. So this gives me the Pantograph look of being long arm quilted, but definitely without the accuracy and the precision. But these are not show quilts. These are quilts that are going to people to be loved. I invest my time and love into these quilts. And I think that the person that I'm making it for, as I'm working on all the different processes of the quilts. Some processes are more fun than others. This is not my favorite part. My favorite part is designing and piecing. But this has to be done in order to get them out the door and into somebody's arms and covering over somebody. For them to enjoy and to be comforted by. So I have my machine speed turned down so that the needle isn't going in and out too fast. And I manipulate the whole quilt sandwich that's pinned together under the needle. The feed dogs on the sewing machine have been dropped. And I have a special darning foot or quilting foot that's been installed, which allows me to use my hands almost like a hoop to hold the material taut as my arms and my hands together guide the fabric to follow the design I want quilted on here. Now I have to pay attention because if I get distracted too much, it's not a good thing. And then I really get wobbly. So why I've got the quilt up and over my shoulder is to carry the bulk and the weight of the quilt so that as I'm feeding this through, it's not all bunched up in front between me and the machine and therefore getting stuck. Now, I'm to almost on the second from the last row, and I'm doing it lengthwise down the quilt as opposed to across the quilt like I normally do, just because it would look the best on this particular quilt. So that means my rows that I'm quilting are quite a bit longer than normal. I try not to do anything bigger than a 60 by 76-inch quilt on this in this process because I find the bulk is too much. Now I'm almost at the end of quilting, so I've only got a little bit over here. But when I'm at the center of the quilting, then I've got rolled up pieces over this side of quilt that's waiting to be done, rolled up areas here of quilting that's already been done, and I've got extra bulk on each side, so it's tighter to work with. So when I'm toward the outer edges of the quilt, it's much easier in the sense of I don't have as much fabric setting in this area right here. Now that being said, this is it's a Janome, and it's a Memory Craft 6600, so 6600. And so it's designed for working on quilts. So the length in here is slightly longer than a normal sewing machine would be. So this enables me to do this. Now you can get machines that have even a longer area in here. And I might invest in something down the road like that. Or a machine that's dedicated just for doing this type of work. And that's all it does, but there's much more space available. A much larger window for like this area here. And but you wouldn't be doing any piecing on that. And they cost like $8,000 on sale. So you can buy a used car for that, easy. It's an investment I don't know if I'm willing to take when I can make this work. Plus, it takes up more floor space, and I'm not using that as much as I would use this machine. By the end of a quilt, I kind of know, my brain and my hands have memorized the pattern a little bit better, so it's easier to flow, but you still have to pay attention. So I'm almost all the way down to where my camera is set up. So we'll have to pause for a little bit, I think, shortly, and fold the quilt back. So I still have that table left. I try to keep my shoulders and my neck relaxed. If I find I'm getting too tense, then I might stop and take a little bit of a break, or just stop and just relax my shoulders like I just did, because I was finding it was getting a little bit tight. Because if you tensed up too much, then you're going to be really sore. And I will stop the machine if I need to reposition my hands. And I try to remember, don't over sew the area that my hands are holding the quilt sandwich firmly. So you see I'm getting towards the end of that. So I'm going to pause. And I'm going to also give a little bit more length here, and then continue on. I find the sound of the machine, because it's not running really fast, almost calming. Come on, baby. Why aren't you wanting to do that jump? Okay, let me see. There's just a seam there, and it didn't, the foot didn't want to seem to go up and over it very easy, and it was just sticking in one spot for a few stitches. So I just raised the presser foot slightly and moved the quilt just ever so slightly. There we go. Fix that problem. There's probably just extra layers of quilt there. Extra layers of fabric. Very well could have been that there was piecing seams on the back of the quilt as well as on the front that intersected right at that point, so it was a little bit thicker. Did I get hung up on a nope? Okay. There's a seam on the back. Yes, there is. Okay, so I'll meet you back when I'm taking the tissue paper out.